Okay, we are live, team.
Can you guys see all the little dots up there?
Yes.
Ooh, they're very sparkly.
Okay, I've just put the link in the chat.
Yeah, I did that. I'm ready.
Okay, great.
Wonderful.
So this is called the Map of Open Source Science. It's a project coming out of NumFocus, which is a nonprofit that really supports a lot of the scientific Python stack. So open source research software, Matplotlib, NumPy, SciPy, those types of projects. Also, it's not restricted to Python, but it's a lot of Python projects. So this map, the thinking here, and we can go back, Sarah, to what you were talking about. How many other projects does Index Network rely on to function? Right? I think ceramic, lit, you mentioned five or six.
Yep.
So that's a lot, and there's a lot of that in Web3, of this interconnected web of everything being dependent on one another. And some of the projects are working on the same stuff, some of the projects are working on different stuff, but a lot of applications rely on the underlying infrastructure projects. So if we can map out that space, it might help people entering DeSci or anything. So this is open source research software as an example. But if we can map out DeSci, it'll help people entering the space sort of identify gaps in the ecosystem where they can put resources and a bunch of other stuff depending on what we map. So for MOS, we've mapped people, projects, organizations, packages, and papers so far. And packages and projects are kind of the same thing, but like AstroPy is a project comprised of many packages. So they're trying to work with that separation, but it's not really a good separation right now. So I will walk through this really quick. And really, I think it's, for context here, is something that can be hacked on pretty easily for this space. Anyone can start building this. We're going to start working on it at SciOS throughout the week and hopefully walk away with a good ecosystem map of DeSci that we can start filling out as time goes on. And then next year have a much bigger map of what this space looks like. So this is built on Kumu. And you can see, I hope, all the nodes up there. And I'm going to remove all the people right now because Kumu is built for several hundred nodes, and this is several tens of thousands of nodes and connections, so it breaks the computer if I keep all the nodes on. So people are, in this context, anyone who has committed a PR to open source research software on GitHub. We add them to the map, and it's only for a couple projects that are up there, but it's a lot of people. So an example of how this would work. These are all the different connections that we've mapped so far. I'll map the projects to the fiscal sponsors, and the only fiscal sponsor we've mapped is NumFocus. We'll zoom in, and you can see the chaos of the ecosystem of all the orange packages and how we start to get a little bit of order in here. So someone entering this space for the first time sees all this noise, has no idea what any of this stuff means or how it's all connected. And now once they map, like, hey, who are the fiscal sponsors of these projects, they can start to see a little bit of structure take place, and they can know that all these projects are related, at least because they're part of the same umbrella, under the same fiscal sponsor umbrella, that of NumFocus. So there's this little feature here where you can click a node and get a bunch of information on it, but that's not exciting. Now I'll map the packages to the projects, and we'll start to see the ecosystem take a little more better shape if it doesn't crash. Okay, so this big project we're seeing down here, for example, I think is Bioconductor. Yeah, so Bioconductor is a very large project, open source tool used in research, comprised of all of these packages. So as an open source contributor, if you're interested in bioscience, essentially, you can find a lot to work on in the Bioconductor ecosystem. It might be a good project to jump into the space through. And you can, I'll try to map people later. You'll start to see which people might be good people to reach out to in that specific ecosystem based on how we map impact, which I'll also talk about in a little bit. You can also see all these other projects over here have their little micro ecosystem. You got the YT, I think this is AstroPi, and it's just an interesting way to start visualizing the space. So if we add some more connections, we can try, let's try dependencies. This might break. Hey, so it'll take a second to render, but I think it's working. This is what I think would be really useful for this space in particular. And one of the great outcomes of this is you can see some of the other stuff we can map down here has to do with organizations that grant money to these open source research software projects. So
that's probably the best network graph I've seen like ever.
It's a lot of fun.
Just have to say that.
So some of these organizations like CZI and Sloan who grant money to like Matplotlib or the developers of Matplotlib to enhance the projects, they are interested in this type of stuff because they like to see the impact of their grant to the software. So they can see if, they give, I'm not really walking through a user story right now, so it's going to be a little sloppy. But like, okay, here we go. If they give money to this project down here, Plotly, yeah, they give money to Plotly. You can see all the in-degree connections depend on Plotly. So they could argue that their grant to Plotly creates impact throughout the network based on that dependency graph.
Oh.
So that's one thing that I think maybe VCs or other institutions, academic institutions that we want to onboard into DeSci might be very interested in. Like if they start building on Ceramic, what else do they have access to as an application? They start using Index Network. What other organizations are using Index Network that they can partner with? Which people are contributing to both Index Network as an open source project and some other open source projects in the ecosystem. So who should they be talking to in the space? Things like that.
Is that like self-reported, like the donations?
So right now, so this is very much an early prototype. It's basically me collecting information and putting it on a spreadsheet. I'm the arbiter of truth. It's a lot of power.
A lot of willpower.
The goal is to use LLMs essentially. So let's think of impact for a second. So for that, I'm going to remove the dependency graph, which didn't fully render, which I'm a little bummed about.
And have you already like used LLMs on these graphs to get some insights?
I've experimented a little bit with coordination network.
Okay, let's be friends though.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think this stuff would be very interesting to bring into Index Network too, just a database. Yeah.
Wow. I can watch knowledge graphs all day.
So I'm gonna try to make sure this doesn't break. Okay, so one of the little quirks I had to work around was too many people. So I'm gonna map people, but only people who have committed more than 10 times to these repositories, which obviously is a horrible measure of contributions to open source research software because some of the writers of the software committed one time is just the entire package. But for the sake of actually showing what works and not crashing my browser, we'll limit the number of people. So we can see, so this is going to end with an example of how we can use LLMs, but we have to talk about impact first. So we can see that people are of different sizes here, and their sizes are dependent on the number of commits they've made to the software that we've mapped so far. So Evan here has, stop moving, buddy. There we go. Evan has committed many times to various repos. You can see the numbers, 28,000 commits. So his circle is very big. But as I just said, that's a horrible measure of actual impact to open source. There's community managers, there's commits that are just like changing the copyright date, so they're not super valuable. But it's also a very easy thing to measure and prove a concept with. But what we want to do is make it so that these circles change based on how the user enters the map and defines their definition of impact. And we can think about like Google Maps. When you load Google Maps, you toggle the layers you want to use based on what you want to map at a specific point in time. If you want to get directions, you don't toggle satellite, you just use the roads. If If you want to like survey some land you're about to buy, you'll toggle the satellite, and then it will talk to you as though it's not really giving you directions, but it's still the same application. So
Who's
if we
buying
can,
land?
is what?
So who's buying land?
DSI house.
All right. Yeah.
we need some. So so the thinking here is if I start interacting with this map and in natural language say, find me the most impactful contributor to open source research software. I define impact as number of commits over the past 5 years with a weighted scale based on most recent being more impactful, and the number of commits to different projects weighted in this relationship to the number of commits overall, and the what else could we use? Number of first commits to projects. So those are my 3 measures of impact, and I describe how they're weighted. The LLM could traverse the map and then come back with just an answer in a couple seconds and say, this person is the most impactful based on your definition of it. And then if I wanted to visualize it, I would click visualize, and it would render the nodes in size based on how I define my impact. So people right now are sized by number of commits. Projects are sized by dependencies. Whoever's more foundational as a project is a bigger circle. But you can change it all, fairly simple, through all this fun stuff. But we have to get it off of Kumu. So this is where y'all come in, hopefully. Maybe someone's really good with new. And you want to help us build it so we can have a real UI with a real solid database. So that's basically it. The 2 takeaways I think we can get from the experience I've had mapping this is it's incredibly valuable to people who are not part of the space. So if we can build this for DSI and we can show it to people who are not in DSI, we can bring more people into this movement. And if the other takeaway,
How to get involved?
yeah, I'm trying to think of the other takeaway. I just had it top of my head, but I don't remember that anymore. It is super valuable. The other takeaway is DSI is much more than the projects we're building in this room. All of these projects are critical to research. Like you would not be able to do a lot of research without NumPy. So I would call NumPy DSI. It's open science, really. It's open source, open science. So if you can't find something to build like that's pure Web3, don't worry about it. There's a lot of stuff out there. It doesn't need to have a token for it to have an impact on how science gets done. So find something else. And then eventually Web3 will become a bigger thing. More people in this ecosystem will accept tokenization, will accept Web3. Projects like Drips, as they get bigger and start actually incentivizing these projects, a lot of these people are going to fall in love with Web3 because Drips is really cool. Like that sort of funding is really neat. HyperCert also pretty effective in this regard, being able to fund open source projects. If you want to get involved, just talk to me, email me. Yeah, we can build this together. It's built by a working group. So I'm the arbiter of truth, but it's really a working group. It's 64 people. It's 22 organizations. And that's basically who's building it. Eventually, we want the database to be managed by community. So people will upvote whether or not something is like, for example, all right, I'm going to start rambling first, I think, but I'll stop. I'll try to stop myself. We've mapped subfields of research. This is ridiculous. This is an impossible task. Define domains of science. But we did it anyway. So we have like data science and Python visualization tools. So we said some projects belong to one random domain. So data science is a big one. I don't know what I'm zooming into here though. Visualization. So these are all visualization tools. Visualization is like the one domain. It's like obvious.
You do run like a classifier to get that, or manually sort of?
Manually input it. This comes from a project called PyViz, managed by this one person who just like classifies. This is the crazy thing about the open source ecosystem. People have been doing this for a long time. They love it and they're really good at it. So getting them in to help us is better than us building stuff to help them. Because they're so good at what they do. I'll try to find data science. No, it's not going to show. But like, who's to say whether or not a package belongs to biology or chemistry? So the community should say, like, I'll map it, and then people will upvote it or downvote it based on where I go, and eventually its actual connection will shift based on that community decision. That's the final output of it. There is a lot to this. So
that could be transpolated to any area, right?
absolutely.
I just want to look at it all day.
Yeah, you're welcome to. It's not public right now, unfortunately.
Oh.
Yeah.
But soon, very soon.
We have to figure. You can't
Dead when.
license a database, and this is just a database. And the platform we're using, as soon as you make it public, you can see the database. And a lot of work has gone into building the database, so we don't want to just like give that away without asking for people to credit back to it. Yeah.
Could you front end like just the chatbot that knows the, like if you don't want to share the database, you could front end like a chatbot that knows how to query the database and just give people the results instead of the whole thing.
That's a great idea. I love that. Want to build it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
We have to. The database is very, very incomplete, and despite the amount of work that's gone into it, it needs a lot of tweaking.
Yeah, but like with the size of context, the LLM could see all the database in one query and parse it.
Maybe help us build it too. If we can input what we've built so far, just basically ask it to clean it up a little bit for us.
Right. I could do like an internal demo, and you could see like how it performs, and then we could like see if it's like user facing in the sense that you could just offer it as like a chatbot people could subscribe to you, and
Yeah.
you monetize it that way.
That'd be awesome.
What's the so this is creating relations internal, right? So like who's funding what projects are related, how they subclassify. But the measure of impact is relative to how it's applied externally, or what are the external outcomes. Now I know that's probably a Herculean endeavor, but is that in the roadmap? So I use SciPy to solve something in the real world.
Mhm.
How do you get that information, or how are there people working on that? The external perspective, the external impact.
So let's remove people. Yes, that's the short answer.
And what's the resultants of all of these?
I don't know how to describe it without showing you. So
Oh, by all means.
if we map projects to granting orgs, I'm going to remove these. I'll try to describe it because this is going to take us a second to render. So it depends on what your measure of impact is in the outside world. But if your measure of impact is, for example, a paper that cites the project, then we can map that. Now, the issue is no one cites open source software. They're starting to. Some projects now have DOIs and they're starting to cite it, but at the same time, the developers of the software don't get credit for like career advancement for building like foundational research software. So no one's, the incentives are so misaligned. This is a much bigger issue. But if we can figure out how to define it other than just papers, that would be awesome.
Because you could also contextualize like the database to the query of the user. So it's like if you want to find out which one are the most relevant open source projects for decentralized science, even if you don't have that filter on the database, if you have an embedding about it, you can create that context that will give you the right response.
Yeah.
I have a question
Mhm.
to continue based on your question to measure of impact. So since we are mostly on Web3, things are traceable, things are verifiable. Like, do you see any starting point to get impact, like from economic value, for example, created like the next data to onboard to that project?
Yeah. So I think the ideal state of this, here you can see like papers that cite some of the projects. So this is like measuring impact. But like the ideal end state of this to me is, all right, we've mapped people, projects, organizations, packages, papers. We're going to map data sets so we can see what data is used in the paper. We've mapped what the organizations that are funding anything. And then we can map patents that have used papers to produce a product.
Yeah.
And then we can map products that come from those patents. And then we can track the income that comes from those products that's produced. And then we can trickle that all the way down.
Nice. That was
Yeah, but that last, so that's interesting because that last part is going to be really hard. part
Oh yeah.
because that's usually not openly shared.
No, it'll require a completely different infrastructure
Yeah.
of a world to live in.
Yeah.
But that's the promise of Web3.
Exactly.
Like Dune analytics. That's similar to Dune.
Yeah, but there's like a socioeconomic piece that's at play here, right? It's not just like you can have the tools to map it, but like in pharma, they're not going to share
Yeah.
their revenues that are coming out of necessarily a particular product or IP.
Legacy won't, but like some of the pharma DAOs might.
Or stuff.
Yeah.
You can always ask.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
like perspectively, I think we have a lot of cool things there.
There's at least now with Web3 the potential for it to
Yes.
happen.
Yeah.
There was not even the potential before.
They will lose the chance to better collaboration. So
Exactly. But you and I have had, I think, conversations. I've heard you talk about the reticence, hesitance of open science to merge, not merge necessarily, but collaborate with Web3-esque functionality. What do you think, aside from being able to, yes, invite them in to help us, which will then give them a taste for it, but what is it that you think that we need to do as a space generally to then make something that is attractive, or not even just attractive, but start the conversation? I know you're doing this, it's part of what you're doing.
Yeah.
But how can the rest of us participate in that endeavor?
I think one of the biggest things is to shit on shitcoins. But
Shots fired.
that's why they don't like the space. That's why most people do not like the space, because like there's so much garbage. And then build stuff that's useful for them. So like Drips is a great example of this. Like I think I'm going to learn more about Drips. I just was introduced to this project, but I'm going to learn more about it because it's iOS. But I think they're building to incentivize Web3 open source projects. So like they should focus on all of these projects, like Matplotlib, Hypersearch for Matplotlib, that drip retroactive funding back through to everyone that's built it. Like that would be amazing. And it's like you don't force it down their throats. You just say, hey, we built this thing. You can claim a username and get money because you've claimed your username that we just set up for you, or you don't need to claim it. We have it ready and waiting for you for when you're ready.
It would be nice to port all of these, considering that they're open source, port them into at least some aspect that incorporates Web3. But I'd argue that like us beyond the incentive frameworks, which are very obvious, like things like index and the infrastructure plays like nodes and whatnot should theoretically be more attractive than let's say Drips.
Yes. So IPFS, I've met people at some of these conferences that know IPFS and are very excited about IPFS. But it's just an infrastructure thing. There's no token.
Yeah.
Like there's Filecoin, but IPFS is its own thing, which is great.
Yeah.
So it's just changing the narrative, showing that it's not just token.
Yeah, I think that like when you use Twitter, right? You know that there's going to be bots on Twitter. Okay, so it doesn't stop you using Twitter. You just learn to recognize a bot and then don't take the opinion or interact with the bot account, right?
Mhm.
I think that yourself in particular, because you have a main line to a lot of these open science advocates from the legacy system, if you will. Like I think the point I think is really important is rather than thinking about shitting on shitcoins, yes, of course, shit on shitcoins. I think we just need to educate people better that there are going to be shitcoins. It's a new system and the incentives are so stacked in favor of people who exploit the system, as with most systems, right? And there will be people that do that. And rather than sort of trying to say, okay, let's make sure all of the projects we do are legit, of course, yes. But I think we just need to educate the people who are on the outside that like they're just the bots of Twitter. The shitcoins are just going to be there and you just have to ignore them and learn to recognize them. See the red flags of which influencers are saying this is going to pump, all that stuff, which is for us obvious, and we just ignore it or shit on it. Like I think we need to teach the people the same thing, because you don't stop using Twitter because of bots. You just learn to not interact with the bots, and it's never going to go away. The shitcoins are never ever going to stop, and no matter what we do, we can either accept it and just move past it and just build better systems and better tokens, because the tokens are useful for a lot of things, right? And educate them as to what is good and what is not and how to recognize that. Or we can just never have the integration. That's kind of how I think we should look at it.
Yeah, I like the metaphor. The bots is a good one. Starting the conversation is really hard though, because you even bring up Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is like a fundamental technology. They kick this all off. They're just like, Bitcoin's a scam.
Yeah.
So
sometimes you can't help people.
But
Right?
they,
You know what I mean? Like,
they also understand how incentives are misaligned. Like researchers
Yes.
are very clear, like view of that science is broken in a fundamental way, and I think that if we show like the market at large that there's better ways to fund science and to show impact, like a more direct I put $1 in, this is what happened with that dollar. And the ability, there's this concept of synergy we were throwing around where you have that network, and if I can show activity in that network, that breeds more activity. Because the moment I see, hey, Pfizer put $1 million for his research and produce all those things, all the other corporate like conglomerates are gonna want to throw money just to find out what is so important about it. So if we can make a system where we can like have the signal be more real, like what you're saying, I can have a lot of commits but didn't contribute. But if we could have like a objective measurement of impact, and it could be the like contextualized to what impact means to the individual, then you can have multiple win conditions which everyone could play. So I'm going for the visualization incentives, or I'm going for the data science incentives, and you could have all of them, like the pie, the cherry, and the ice cream, and then take everything else too, because like it's not a either or situation. It's like both and.
Yeah.
And like that's the most important message for, I think, open source scientists.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. The crazy part is with the software, at least, is that the
It's all digital.
and a lot of the people who develop the research. So I'm the PM at an initiative out of NumFocus called the Open Source Science Initiative, and our task is to connect the people who use these tools to the people developing the tools. It's sort of crazy to think they're two different user groups. Like it's all of them are related to research, but the people truly developing like Matplotlib are developing Matplotlib and not necessarily doing hardcore research anymore. And that train of communication has been lost. So it's two different conversations. The conversations with the researchers and their incentives, like a career path, getting funding, all that can change, is going to be a different conversation than like a maintainer of NumPy who's trying to get a grant to continue to develop the research or the software.
There's definitely a lesson in there for us.
Yeah.
We'd like to claim that we're community focused largely, but I wonder if as we mature, we're going to lose that communication pathway between those who are building and those who are actually using.
Yeah, that's a good fear.
Not if we use a AI.
Yes. Cool.
So yeah, finally,
It's so pretty. It is
So we make a protocol on everyone's GitHub email, stick a hyperservice and we go around so you guys are NumPy, right? And then we like retroactive funds, and then we say, and then we put it inside those pretty wallets. So we attach to the GitHub email and say
I was.
first come
Still am.
first serve.
I don't know.
Wow, I'm on YouTube. How you YouTube?
I can't see that.
Josh, am I on next?
Yes.